All right, good morning, everyone. Hello, I'm Adrian Tadala, the Knowledge Management Officer of the TOPS program, and welcome to today's webinar. We are excited to host the Lift2 project of FHI 360 and their presentation on emerging evidence, how integrated referrals are associated with adherence, food security, and resilience. Thank you so much for filling out the poll to the bottom left. I can see that we have a range of attendees today. Welcome, welcome. So before I hand it over to the presenters, I would like to do some housekeeping for today's webinar. As you can see on your bottom right, you can see the group chat. And please, for any types of questions that you may have throughout the presentation, or if you're experiencing any technical issues, please go ahead and type up those comments and questions on the group chat. And for the questions regarding the presentation, we will actually have a Q&A after the full presentation, and we will be sure to bring up your questions then to have Mandy and Claire answer them. And please be reminded that this webinar is being recorded, and after today's event, we will follow up with an email containing the recording of the webinar as well as presentations and a document of questions if we don't get to all of the questions today. All right, so with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Sonia, who will introduce the webinar.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Sonia Horn. I am the Knowledge Management Officer with Lift. And so just to give you a quick introduction to the project, we are the Livelihoods and Food Security Technical Assistance Project. You'll hear us refer to it as Lift2 or Lift throughout this presentation. We're a USAID-funded cooperative agreement managed by FHI 360. Lift works with USAID missions, implementing partners, and local service providers, including health facilities, to develop and strengthen multi-sectoral clinic-to-community referral systems. Our work focuses on linking vulnerable populations, including PLHIV, OVC and their caregivers, to clinical services and to community-based services that can improve economic and food security and reduce common barriers to clinical care. Our two presenters today are Claire Gillum. She's Lift2's technical officer. She contributes to our quality improvement work as well as data collection and management in multiple Lift countries. And our second presenter is going to be Mandy Swan. She's a technical advisor with Lift. She supports management and provides technical leadership in nutrition, HIV/AIDS, and health systems strengthening. So with that, I will hand this over to Claire and Mandy to begin the presentation.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Sonia just said, I'm Claire Gillum, Lift's technical officer. I just want to say thank you to the TOPS program for hosting this today and to Adrian also for the introductions. So just going to launch right into the slides here. To reiterate also for those who are just joining, our plan for the webinar this morning is to provide a brief introduction to Lift. We're then going to dive in to discuss the results of some recent assessments we've carried out as a project with the purpose of better understanding associations between referrals, specifically referrals through Lift-supported referral networks, and the outcomes of food security, resilience, and adherence. And then we will also leave time for question and answer at the end. So as my colleague Sonia mentioned, the Livelihoods and Food Security Technical Assistance, or LIFT project, is a 5-year associate award with PEPFAR funding through USAID's Bureau for Global Health Office of HIV/AIDS. It was launched in 2013 as a follow-on to the LIFT-1 project, and we are a global mechanism managed by FHI 360 in partnership with CARE and World Vision. So our overall objective as a project is to work with USAID and its partners to develop and strengthen clinic community referral systems, specifically kind of tailoring the support we provide to needs identified by country missions and local stakeholders. As you'll see as the presentation progresses, this referral work means that LIFT operates across several sectors, namely health, specifically HIV, AIDS, and nutrition, economic strengthening, and food security. As a project, we focus on referrals that link vulnerable people, so PLHIV or people living with HIV and AIDS, orphans and vulnerable children, and their caretakers. And we link them to services that can support improvements in food security and economic stability, as well as linking them to essential clinical services to promote improved nutrition and access to and retention in HIV care. And so this next slide is a helpful diagram to help us think about LIFT's conceptual approach. We utilize this three-level livelihoods framework to inform our thinking around service targeting and really how to connect people with services that are most relevant to their needs. So our goal is for LIFT-supported referral systems to connect households or individuals with services that are appropriate for their circumstances based on where they fall along this pathway. So not necessarily, if you're in one group, then the services listed there are the only ones we would connect you to, but more that it helps to think through what is most appropriate for households based on their current household vulnerability status or their livelihood and food security status. And kind of with the classification of people in this way, thinking through these groups of provide, protect, and promote, that helps us think through the best approaches to move people up this pathway and improve their resilience and food security. And these kind of groupings are going to be important. We will come back to them later in the presentation as we begin to discuss a recent assessment in Lesotho. So with that kind of background in mind, I'm going to move on to talking about some specific activities completed under LIFT. As a global project, you'll see here that we've operated in the 7 highlighted countries in sub-Saharan Africa, working with USAID missions to provide a variety of support and technical assistance to referral networks. Today, we're just going to focus on sharing results for some project-based assessments we have conducted in Lesotho, Malawi, and Tanzania. And particularly important before I kind of launch into talking about that work specifically is to understand that LIFT doesn't have a research mandate. We, as the title would suggest, we're a technical assistance project, and these activities were supported by our funder in order to generate evidence on our project approaches. So across LIFT countries, we work to collect data to better understand the results of the work that we're doing, to contribute to project learning, and also kind of measurement of referral activities. And so that has also included things like contributing to some CEEs as well as PEPFAR-MER indicators. So when we think about the assessments we're going to talk about today, these have really been another opportunity for us to leverage our routine M&E data and to build on this in the form of what a lot of people would think as kind of operations research. So with that, I'm going to move on to talking about the first of these assessments that we'll be discussing today, and that is a vulnerability and food security study carried out in Lesotho. And for those who might not be familiar with that context, Lesotho has one of the highest HIV prevalences in the world. It also experiences multiple interconnected health, nutrition, and food security issues. So in addition to HIV, there is a large related burden of TB, as well as chronic malnutrition. Approximately 1/3 of children under age 5 are stunted, and then also high vulnerability to climate change related shocks, which will be important later in the presentation. And with a largely rural population and these kind of interrelated needs, improved service integration and systems of referrals can be particularly important. So LIFT's work in Lesotho was focused in 2 districts, Mahalishoek and Tabatseka, And the referral networks we supported in these districts were comprised of a total of 32 organizational members, 4 of which were clinical health facilities, and the rest were community-based organizations, government ministries, and other service providers. And so, as you'll see in some subsequent slides, this assessment built on existing data which had initially been collected for programmatic reasons. However, we kind of saw an opportunity to take this data and use it as a foundation for an assessment that would allow us to better understand the association between referrals and household food security and vulnerability. And so we implemented a pre-post assessment with a sample of clients referred through LIFT-supported referral networks in these 2 districts, using client surveys based on the household hunger scale and a modified version of the Progress Out of Poverty Index, which we have termed the LIFT score. And for anyone who might not be familiar with these measures, HHS is kind of a simple indicator used to measure household hunger, which was developed and validated for cross-cultural, so multi-country use by the FANTA project. And then PPI is a 10-question measurement tool that collects information about household characteristics and household assets in order to determine household poverty status. So, as I said earlier, the assessments we're talking about today were very much built on the LIFT project's routine M&E data, and building on that, and the BFS, or Vulnerability and Food Security Study, is a really good example of that. Part of the technical assistance LIFT provides to referral networks includes helping service providers to identify appropriate services with which to link their clients. And so this assistance can include a lot of things. It incorporates creation of tools like service directories, as well as referral counseling guidance. And importantly, in Lesotho, a system was implemented whereby referral forms were created using ComCare, ComCare being a mobile data collection app with which some of you may already be familiar. And using this mobile system of completion of referral forms, that allowed for the incorporation of the HHS and LIFT score questions into the standard questions that are asked of all clients at the time of referral. And this app then categorized people according to the scores they received on these measures, and categorized them into one of the 9 groups you would see on the matrix on this slide. And so again, here you see the groupings I was talking about earlier of provide, protect, and promote categories, and then also the 3 hunger categories that come out of the HHS, so little to no, moderate, and severe hunger. And so service providers were trained by LIFT to understand the types of services that might be most appropriate for a client depending on which of these 9 categories they fell into. And so for anyone who's familiar with HHS and the PPI on which the LIFT score is based, you'll know that these measures are really designed to be utilized as tools at kind of more of a population level. So the way we're talking about them here and using them does sound a little atypical. However, LIFT found that these measures can be really a useful way for service providers to understand the household context of their clients and kind of provide them with a tool to better understand the types of services that might be most relevant and appropriate for any given client. And so use of these measures, which were really, as I said, collected initially for programmatic reasons, then went on to form the basis for one of the tools to be used in this vulnerability and food security study. And so to think through and kind of the process and the methods of this VFS study, hopefully this flowchart diagram will be fairly helpful. And so this study was separated into 3 different segments. Beginning in the leftmost box, the orange box, you'll see what we call the pre-test. So the LIFT score and HHS data that I just described that was collected from all clients at the time of referral. And then when we were designing this assessment, we randomly sampled clients to be surveyed over the study period, ensuring that clients were selected to be interviewed 1 year following their referral. And these clients were divided into 2 groups. So for those who had not completed their referral, which means not accessing the service to which they were referred, not accessing and receiving that service, we conducted the loss to follow-up study. And that's a series of short questions that were really aimed to understand why clients might have failed to complete their referral, specifically thinking about barriers to accessing services. And for those who did complete the referral, we then repeated the LIFT score and HHS surveys. This is what we refer to as the post test. And for those who are familiar with pre-post designs, one of the particularly important considerations is ensuring that your design takes into consideration changes in contextual and environmental factors that may impact your outcome of interest. And so for this assessment, we conducted the post-test 1 year after referral so that we were collecting data on clients at the same time within the farming and harvest calendar. Obviously, not to do so, or if we had not done so, then that would have impacted kind of particularly food security status. So if you imagine collecting this data at, harvest season, and then if we had collected it again in the lean season, then we would really have incorporated some bias and challenges there. So we specifically set out to do our post-test 1 year after clients completed referrals to factor that in. However, best of intentions, between the time of referrals and then the post-test, the El Nino drought hit Lesotho extremely hard. World Food Program statistics show that with crop failures and then correspondingly high food prices in Lesotho, over 700,000 people are in need of food assistance, with 1/3 of the population being considered food insecure. So this shift in context obviously had very major implications for our assessment, and thinking about, perhaps if we'd had a comparison group, that might have allowed us to understand kind of the implications of the drought versus kind of what our referrals might have contributed to in terms of individual level changes. However, given kind of the logistics of this and this not being a rigorous research design, unfortunately, that wasn't possible. But however, what we did add to this in order to help us kind of understand and pull apart some of the different factors that were impacting on our clients' food security and vulnerability was to add a 3rd component to this study. And so this included returning to clients whose HHS or LIFT score had worsened subsequent to their referral. So those for whom we had asked the repeat LIFT and HHS questions and had found that their score had actually declined since referral. And we went back to those clients and asked them some targeted follow-up questions in order to better understand what might account for some of that decline. And so now to begin looking at some of our initial findings, and also to clarify kind of the timeline of this, data collection for each of these surveys was completed in December 2016, and a full analysis and reporting is still in progress. But as you'll see from the next couple of slides, early results do look very promising. This chart displays the results of the repeat HHS and LIFT score for clients who completed their referral. And the top lighter blue bar for each of the food security and vulnerability is the percentage of the sample who showed improvement in their food security and vulnerability. And by improved vulnerability, what we really mean is higher resilience. And so we see here that 25.9% of the clients surveyed had an improvement in their food security, while 55.7% had an improvement, higher resilience, lower vulnerability. And then we have also conducted an initial sub-analysis for clients in the sample who reported that they were HIV positive. And a small caveat, it's unlikely that this obviously captures all of the PLHIV clients in our sample, as it only includes those who self-reported as HIV positive. However, you'll see here the results are actually pretty interesting in that for HIV-positive clients, an even greater proportion showed improvements on both of these measures. And so moving from that kind of individual level analysis to an analysis of the sample population, we see here that the average lift score, and the lift score, as with the PPI, is on a 0 to 100 scale, with higher scores being better. The average score for the sample population at the time of referral was 58.82. And then 1 year post-referral, the average score had improved to an average of 62.59. And then likewise with the HHS score for food security, the chart on the right-hand side of the slide there, you'll see that the average score at the time of referral was 1.9, and HHS is a scale 0 to 9 with a lower score being better. So you'll see the decrease is actually, the decrease in the score is an improvement. And then 1 year post-referral, the average score for the sample population was 1.54. So again, encouraging here to see that on both measures there was an average overall improvement for our sample population. And then moving on to the second component of this assessment, the loss to follow-up findings, so the survey that was conducted with people who did not complete their referrals. We really found that the majority response when clients were asked why they had failed to complete the referral was a lack of resources. And when asked to expand on this, the type of resources cited included money, time, transportation. And for a lot of project implementers, these results probably don't sound terribly surprising, particularly when you're working with rural populations for whom kind of physical access services can be a real challenge. It can still be helpful, and LIFT has found it helpful to think about these results in terms of what a project can do to address certain barriers and what types of issues are out with direct project control. So, for example, some clients reported that they had failed to understand what a referral meant or where they were supposed to go to access a service. And this is certainly something that LIFT can and does address through increased capacity building support for our referral network members, the service providers in our networks. However, several clients reported that illness that they experienced or their household members experienced meant that they didn't have the resources available to then act upon the referral. Obviously, this kind of barrier is certainly something that is more out with the capacity of a project to address directly. And then kind of switching pace again, the third component of this assessment, looking at the clients who worsened on one or both measures and who agreed to participate in the follow-up survey. And that was a group of 51. And this survey, it's important kind of to think through and understand how measures like PPI, on which we base the LIFT score, are calculated, and kind of acknowledging the limitation of using it in an assessment like this. So when used at an individual level, these kind of measures, you have to think about how changes in responses to certain questions might impact the score in a way that perhaps isn't related to your project's intervention, or even necessarily can't be directly tied into the outcome you're looking at. So for example, for the LIFT score, changes such as like an increase in household size or moving to a house that might have fewer rooms can then impact your score in a negative way. And so we saw some of that in this population that we sampled here. But also kind of more interestingly and importantly for us, we find that as we were thinking about the impact of the drought specifically on our sample population, we found that just over 50% of those interviewed for this survey grow at least some of the food that their household relies on. And for those who stated that, all reported that the harvest this year had been much weaker than in previous years, and that they had no surplus of the food that they grow to sell for additional household income. Interestingly, though, only a small number of those interviewed for this survey reported that the primary reason for their food insecurity was the drought, with the majority actually citing lack of resources being the key reason they attributed this to. However, we do have to think about a question like this. The way it was designed was only allowed a single best response, and so there may have been some slight bias in the responses here. We now understand, thinking about these questions, that clients may have reported lack of resources as the reason, thinking that as a project we may be able to provide them with additional benefits or provide them with resources that they needed. And so kind of really taking that in context and adding it to some free response questions that we added to the survey also. We asked participants to just share openly any challenges their household has faced over the past year. And a significant number of those stated that the drought had been a huge issue for their household. One quote from a participant specifically said, "Putting food on the table has been so difficult since we have not had any harvest from last year because of the severe drought and no money to buy as there were such huge hikes in food prices." And so that kind of reinforces some of the context we understand is going on in Lesotho, the impact of the drought on this population. And so helping that additional data to put into context the other things we're learning from the other components of this assessment. So really kind of to wrap this up here and think about when we take these three groups of findings together, what we're beginning to understand is that referrals were associated with some improvements in food security and reductions in vulnerability for a sample of the clients LIFT worked with in Lesotho, with an overall improvement in both measures, HHS and LIFT score, across this sample. For those who saw declines in those measures post-referral, we do have that interesting data suggesting that the drought certainly had an impact on households both in Mahalisuk and Tabatseka, both districts. And then also, kind of even with targeted referrals, particularly for vulnerable groups, there are still significant barriers to accessing needed services that really require a more integrated approach to address. And that's a really good point for me to transition over to Mandy, who's going to talk about some of our work in Tanzania and Malawi, looking at retention and care and adherence to treatment amongst some of our referral clients.
Okay, thank you so much, Claire. We're going to switch gears a little bit now for the rest of the presentation. And so I'm going to talk about another assessment that LIFT has recently done to understand client-level outcomes associated with referrals. And while the Lesotho study looked at food security and vulnerability, the assessment I'm going to talk about looked much more at HIV care outcomes. And so before I launch into the details, we wanted to provide this graphic as just sort of a conceptual framing for our work as it relates particularly to this assessment. And the idea here is really that we're working through a referral network, linking people to supportive community services that have a focus on economic strengthening, livelihoods, and food security. And these services have the potential to mitigate some of the known barriers to HIV care. So things like food security, transportation costs, and lost opportunity costs, income cuts and wage cuts as a result of seeking care. So those are all fairly well-documented barriers to HIV care. And what we wanted to see is whether by addressing some of those aspects, those barriers, whether there's an association between referral and some more downstream outcomes of HIV care seeking. So that figure that's on the right of this graphic is representative of the HIV treatment cascade. And just to introduce that a little bit, it's basically the first bar you see there is testing and diagnosis. The next is linkage to care. The middle one there is retention in care, adherence to ARBs, and then the last one is viral load suppression. And the idea, it's tiered that way, sort of representing that clients are frequently lost as they progress from one stage to the next. And obviously the goal is to increase retention as they move through this cascade or this process. So with that in mind, the assessment that I'm going to tell you guys a little bit more about, we call it the ART Adherence and Retention Assessment, or we often refer to it as the ART check. But essentially the purpose was to understand whether completing a referral from a health facility to a community-based service, again with a focus on economic strengthening type services, was associated with lower ART default among HIV-positive clients. So default, of course, the negative outcomes. We want to reduce that amongst the population. The design we used here was observational cohort, basically observational meaning we didn't assign people into different study arms. We sort of let the project play out. People were referred, and then we started assessing them once after they'd been referred. And cohort meaning we followed the same clients over time. And the main data sources we used for this assessment were our own referral records, as well as clinical ART records. As Claire mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this was carried out in Malawi and Tanzania, so those are the findings we're going to share with you today. And this assessment is actually ongoing in Zambia, but we'll have findings later this fiscal year from Zambia. We decided to look at this area and these outcomes in large part to address some of the priorities of PEPFAR 3.0, which are heavily focused on adherence and retention in care. And very similar to LIFT-2, as Claire mentioned, we use much more of an operational research approach using project M&E data and then expanding on it to try to understand potential contributions of referrals and clinic-to-community linkages to these outcomes of adherence and retention. And the focus, again, as in LIFT-2, was sort of more on learning through implementation. And with that, we were able to, because we implemented this assessment in multiple countries over several rounds of data collection, we did kind of refine and adapt our approach quite a bit as we went on. And so I'll discuss that as we go through the next few slides. So essentially what we did was we looked at clinical ART records for HIV-positive referral clients at multiple time points. And we compared these to non-referral ART clients to determine if the referral clients were more or less likely to default on treatment. And the mechanics of how we went about that were somewhat unique. We used our own referral data to generate random samples of referral clients using their referral client IDs. And here we focused only on clients that had completed their referral, meaning they'd acted on the referral and received the service at the community. We provided those lists, those random samples of clients to health facilities, who then matched our referral client IDs to individual clinical records. And then we worked through and with health facility staff. We provided them with standardized forms to collect the data on the outcomes we were interested in, and they then provided LIFT with de-identified data for each client. We had to do it this way because LIFT, given our ethics approvals for this assessment, we were not allowed to directly access medical records. Of course, they've got identifying and sensitive information about clients. So this approach of working through the health facility staff was really important for client confidentiality and maintaining our ethical research approach. It did, as you might imagine, also introduce some challenges, which I'll talk about as we go. But we were really drawing here on the strong relationships that we'd already established with these health facilities, working in partnership with them through the referral network.
Okay, so just a little bit more about the clients that we were working with for this assessment. So in terms of the referral clients, Malawi, we did 3 rounds of data collection, meaning we collected data at 3 different time points. We worked with 6 health facilities, and you'll see there the number of referral clients that we included at each round, starting with 120 in round 1 and 89 down in round 3. In Tanzania, we were only able to complete 2 rounds of data collection. This was just due to the time horizon. We were working in Tanzania, and there we worked with 4 health facilities and included 40 referral clients in both rounds. As I mentioned in the previous slide, in both countries we started with random samples of clients, but there were some barriers that kind of prevented us from maintaining that random sampling, primarily incomplete data at facilities. And in addition, some clients they basically transferred from a facility that was participating in the assessment to one that wasn't, and we simply didn't have the resources to track each of those clients at their new facility. In a very small number of cases, clients died between the first and the last rounds, but I think that was maybe just one or 2. So that sort of accounts for that decrease over time that you see, particularly in Malawi. In terms of the comparison groups, this is another area where our approach evolved as we gained more experience with the approach. In Malawi, where we started this activity, we really compared referral clients to the general, basically the ART client population as a whole at the same facilities. In Tanzania, we sort of gained a little bit more comfort and familiarity with the approach and added a matched comparison. So that's basically a non-referral ART client matched by age and sex to the referral client to be able to compare, and this just sort of strengthened our design and helped us to sort of address some of the inherent biases that might exist from not including a comparison group. Okay, and this is essentially a slide of what we found. So some of our initial findings from these assessments. On the left of the slide, you've got the 3 rounds that were conducted in Malawi and the 2 in Tanzania on the right. These were basically conducted at 6-month intervals and looked back over a designated time period from each of those assessment dates. Basically what you see here is a really positive trend. The association between, so again, default is a negative outcome. So the fact that the referral clients, which are in this lighter teal color, the fact that that's lower is a good thing. And the comparison group, again in Malawi, that's like the entire ART sample for the facilities that we worked with. In Tanzania, that's actually a matched comparison. The variance in all cases is favorable for referral clients. So again, given the study design, we're not able to draw a causal inference, and we actually are still looking at these data to sort of understand why we're seeing some of the trends we're seeing. But generally, we're very encouraged by this pretty consistently positive trend across all time periods and both countries. So given some of the assumptions and limitations that I've already talked about with the ART check, we wanted to pair that with client surveys. We also conducted stakeholder focus group discussions in both countries, but I'm not going to, just for the sake of time, share those findings, but they're fairly similar overall. But did want to share some of the findings from the client surveys because I think they help paint sort of a clearer picture between the link between the referrals and HIV care seeking that really complement the ART check data, which is sort of at a higher level.
So we conducted surveys with a sample of referral clients, and again, the aim was to really understand how, from their perspective, referrals may have influenced adherence, as well as some other outcomes that we also asked about. So interestingly, over 85% of clients indicated that referrals contributed to better health for themselves or their family. And when we asked about what those improvements were, there were a range of different responses, including providing direct food and nutritional support, which led to better nutrition, being better able to attend all of their medical appointments, and being better able to take all of their medications as prescribed. We also tried to dig in a little bit to understand how they, from their perspective, that was happening, or how the referral sort of influenced those better health outcomes that they had reported. And 66% indicated that the referral helped them to buy or grow food, and almost 61% indicated that the referral, or really the service they got from the referral, helped them to afford transportation to the facility to be able to maintain care. Interestingly, all of the clients that indicated better health indicated that essentially that the referral and that whole process let them know that the facility staff care about them, and that just in and of itself made them more willing to come back to the facility and more interested in seeking care there. So that is what's interesting. I think that kind of points to more of a almost a psychosocial pathway, certainly more so than an economic or food security pathway that the other two aspects there indicate. But all of those aspects, they reported, encouraged them to stay in care. Other outcomes that we looked at in these client surveys were improved household food security, again attributing that to the referral. Almost 67% of clients felt that the referral helped to improve their food security. I think that we didn't get into the mechanics of food security. It's, of course, a very complex construct that includes availability and access, utilization, etc. So we didn't dive into that. This is sort of a high-level metric at this point. The improved economic security, almost or over 55% of respondents indicated that the referral had helped contribute to their economic security, and specifically they indicated receipt of farm or business inputs, that they were able to expand an existing business or start a new business, or simply that they learned a new skill that helped with their economic security. And then the final bullet here, we were surprised, I think, to see that almost just under 80% of the respondents indicated reduced stigma within the community, which is excellent. I think we had included this question thinking that it would essentially be linked to improved economic stability, improved health, being viewed as a more productive member of society. Although, given that very high percentage, we also wondered if sort of this might also be, again, related a bit more to the mechanics of the referral process. It was designed in such a way that clients were provided with sort of personalized interactions with different service providers along the way at the various stages of the referral process. So again, this may have been kind of what they were referring to in terms of that reduced stigma versus a longer term or downstream change. But we don't know. The question, unfortunately didn't dig into that level of detail. We did a similar survey in Malawi as well. So again, we sampled 173 referral clients. Just in terms of very brief background, there were 3 sites within Malawi Balaka, which was like a very comprehensive referral network with lots of different service providers. And then Kasungu and Lilongwe were very targeted. So it's basically focused on referrals between the clinic and community savings, so VSLA services, so not a wide range. And I just wanted to mention that because some of these findings are broken down because of the difference in these two models. Across all three sites, though, the majority of clients reported that their ability to save money improved after completing their referral. I don't think that's surprising, especially given the focus on savings in 2 of the 3 sites, which was really the main or only service available. Almost 73% of the clients surveyed in Balaka and almost 96% in Kasungu actually credited their referrals with helping them stay on ART. So again, that's their perception that this was really a helpful way of encouraging that care seeking. And then 76% of clients and 92% of clients in Kasungu and Lilongwe indicated that they would be willing to spend their savings on health costs. So I guess this just really gets at clients being sort of influenced by the service that they're getting to focus more on health care and sort of a willingness to spend their resources on health, which could have future impacts on their access and retention in care. The results for Malawi were published in Global Health Science and Practice, and the link to the journal article, which is open access, is right there. Okay, so I guess just briefly, what do we want you guys to take away from this webinar? I know there's been a lot. From Claire's presentation, certainly she summed it up as well, but clinic-to-community referrals were associated with improvements in average household food security and economic resilience, despite severe drought conditions in Lesotho. From the ART adherence and retention assessment, we saw a lot of promising trends that indicate that implementing clinic-to-community referrals along with clinical ART programming could be beneficial in reducing client default in a range of different contexts. So that was really sort of an encouraging finding that we're still looking into again a bit more. LIFT is going to continue to explore these outcomes within our own programming, again, sort of trying to gain a better understanding of possible pathways for some of the effects that we've observed and that we are continuing to measure. So the ART assessment is in progress in Zambia. We expect to have some results later this fiscal year. And we're also conducting a mixed methods assessment in Zambia to understand how referral networks might affect loss to follow-up and support new linkages into care, so people who are previously not in care but are HIV positive and linking them. So those are some outcomes that we are continuing to look at. And finally, we hope that the approaches that we've described today might be useful for other implementers who want to supplement their routine M&E, who are tasked with looking at client outcomes but don't have substantial research budgets or mandate. Hopefully those efforts can be informed by LIFT learning in all of these areas, from the design, planning, through implementation and data analysis. And I guess that leads me to the last slide here, which is sort of just a plug for these practitioner guides, which LIFT has been developing, focusing on all aspects of establishing and supporting integrated referral networks that link clinical and community services. We've got a number of them, and the final, or I don't know if it's the final one, the next one that will be posted later this month is about these assessments that we've talked about and how we conducted them, and includes a lot of the lessons learned. So the link is there, and hopefully you guys will check them out. And that is the end of the presentation. So we'd like to open the floor to questions. I think there may have been some already, but I think feel free to type questions in the group chat or comments. I think I'm handing it back now to Adrian to moderate that session. Is it Adrian or Sonia?
Hi, Mandy. This is Sonia. Our first question's from Julia Crowley, and she says it seems as though there's a slight increase in default in Malawi between round 2 and 3. And do either of you have any thoughts on any potential explanation for that increase?
Yes. Yes and no. So I went back to the slide I think she was referring to here, where you see in round 1 there's about a 10% default. Round 2 it's 2.7, and it goes back up to 7.9. I mean, I think certainly several things could be going on here to explain the different trends we're seeing. Of course, there's potential for some unmeasured confounders that we just simply will not be able to look at. But there are certainly aspects of the data that we do have that we're sort of now digging into to try to understand a little bit more about what's going on here. My thought initially, so this was not disaggregated by different service types, and so different service types, if you think about like a cash transfer versus a savings group, there will be a different time period before people see benefits from different types of services. So some of that might be coming into play, and we want to start teasing those kind of nuances out a little bit more. In addition, round 1 data includes some time before clients got a referral. So there might be some, basically that set of data, because clients were referred at different points throughout the preceding period. Some clients hadn't yet gotten a referral, so there might be something happening within that first round that we need to examine a little bit more. And I think one of the analyses that we're hopefully going to be able to do is looking specifically more at time from the referral and looking sort of like referral was made at time 0, and looking a little bit more specifically at at 3 months, what did clients look like? At 6 months, what did clients look like? At 9 months, etc. Because these are, in some ways, mixing a little bit of that time period. So I don't have a clear answer for you yet, but we've definitely noted that trend and want to dig in to sort of see what from our own data can help explain that a little bit more.
All right, thank you, Mandy. Now we have another question from Alfred. He says, thank you for the presentation for Lesotho, and I think this is for Claire. Considering the timing of the study, was there a mechanism to account or discount of changes that could be attributed to drought emergency responses that were outside the referral system that were also happening at that time?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Alfred. It's a great question, and that kind of gets to the heart of when we're talking about these assessments being kind of operations research, kind of bolstered M&E data of a sort. We would have loved to have, done this perhaps with a comparison group that would have helped us more parse apart what we could potentially attribute as an association more related to the Lyft-supported referral networks versus other changes going on at the time. And you're very correct in pointing out that, while I talked about the drought potentially having had a negative impact, there are also other things like other projects and certainly the kind of emergency responses that are going on in Lesotho that could have also helped, support households' food security. So kind of the short answer is we didn't methodologically, we weren't able to add sort of a comparison group or any kind of advanced statistical analyses that would help us kind of pull apart those impacts. So really when we talk about these improvements or the proportions we've seen that have improved post-referral, we can kind of talk about that in the context of an association, but certainly cannot directly attribute that to LIFT's work directly. I think, when we have done these studies and we've tried to kind of pull in a little more detail kind of from that worsened study, talking about, we asked participants kind of about other services they might be receiving and are still looking into that data to help understand, are all of these participants or clients that were sampled, receiving other services, or was it very much that the LIFT referral network was mostly the benefits they were receiving at that time? But that is still in process as we work on those analyses. But it's a great question, and it is kind of a challenge in terms of when we talk about these kind of assessments that we do have to, be understanding of the limitations of what we can say based on the methodology.
Okay, we have another question from Angela. She also says, thank you for the presentation. Is there any disaggregated demographic data publicly available that contrasts the benefit of referral programs for different populations of people living with HIV, and she gives gender, disability, things like that? And that can be, I think, for both of our presenters.
Okay, thanks. That's a good question, and I know that we are tracking gender disaggregations. I don't believe we are tracking disability. It's not one of the measures that I believe are referral data that we have collected. So in terms of publicly available, I might have to defer to Claire. I don't know if, I know in some of the cases we're still sort of publishing the reports of our findings. But we have looked at gender, and I believe some of that does feature in the report that we have been working on. Claire, do you have anything more helpful to say there?
Just to clarify, and I'm not sure, Angela, if you were talking specifically about LIFT data or if we're just familiar with other data sources that might do that kind of disaggregation. In terms of LIFT, Mandy's correct that we track all of our indicators and reporting with gender disaggregation. We have not done any disability disaggregation. We do also report on OVC serve in our current ongoing work in Zambia, so that's looking at kind of tracking of program benefits for orphans and vulnerable children and their caregivers. But in terms of demographic publicly available data, I'm not immediately familiar with any. That's not to say it isn't out there, but I would say let us get back to you on that one. I'm happy to check in with some of our colleagues and see if they're familiar with any of those data sources. And as Adrian said at the beginning, if there's any questions we don't get to, then we're happy to write up some responses and share those after.
Yeah, I think one challenge with referral program data that might be publicly available is just that the nature of referral networks and referral programs can be so different. So LIFT referral approach is very unique, linking clinics to community economic strengthening services. But we can definitely look to see what else might be out there. We've certainly, referenced the available literature in designing our programs and things, but what we found was really that most referral programs are not designed quite the way Lyft is, but yeah, as Claire mentioned, we can certainly follow up on your question.
Thanks, Sandy. So we have another question. This time it's from Christina Delatorre. She's asking, how involved were facility staff in making sure referrals to the community were completed?
I would say very involved. The main focus of Lyft has been really establishing the referral networks and ensuring that they're functioning well, and that clients are actually being linked to services. And we've worked with health facility staff as well as all the other network members to really, make sure that they're following up on clients and ensuring that they're accessing services to the extent that that's in their control. So across the board, that's been really the emphasis that Lyft has had in terms of our own programming, just sort of facilitating the referrals and making sure people have the ability to complete the referrals. I'm not sure if that answered your question or if Claire might have something to add.
Yeah, just a small addition. Mandy's response was great and definitely kind of covers what Lyft contributes to in terms of that referral completion. I think also interesting that some quality improvement work we've done in Tanzania and also in Zambia has really emphasized working with facility staff and the staff of community-based organizations in our referral networks to increase referral completion rates. And so doing kind of capacity building around ways that the staff can be involved in that, supporting clients to complete referrals. And so that's definitely been an emphasis for Lyft as a project.
All right. Are there any more questions from the participants? And again, if you can think of a question might come up after the webinar, please go ahead and email us, and we'll get that to both Mandy and Claire to respond to that question. I see that Julia Cowley is typing. Give it a few seconds. And again, I just want to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded, and we will have both the recording and the presentation sent as a follow-up email, and also will be available on the FSN Network website, which we will also give you the link at the email. So Julia asks, did you look at different types of services provided with the referrals, access to VSLAs? Were those looked at in addition to adherence?
We have that information. We are tracking where clients got services, but right now the data that we have doesn't disaggregate by what service people received. So there is variation. And that's one of the areas that I think we're trying to look at a little more closely, in part to answer your previous question about kind of why we see some of the variation that we see from round to round, and some of it might be linked to what type of service people received and the time it takes for that service to sort of materialize a benefit, a tangible benefit for that client and their household. So we have data on that, and we're hoping to be able to analyze that in the next few weeks and months.
All right. I think there are other questions. Claire, Mandy, you have some last words about the project and then the future activities within List 2 that you would like to share?
I'm sorry, Adrienne, can you repeat that?
I guess there are no more questions. Any, I guess, last words about the current project right now within Lyft?
Oh, sure. So I think, as I mentioned, we are sort of sharing our preliminary findings from both of these assessments. There's certainly more analysis that we can do and are hoping to do. And as I mentioned, we are in the process of conducting some other assessments focused on Zambia right now, where we hope to have several more findings related to these topics. So stay tuned on that, and if you're interested in any more information about the assessments we've talked about or other aspects of the LIFT project, our website is right there on the last slide, and all the contact information for ourselves, as well as Clinton Spears, who's our project director, and Tim Quick, who's the AOR for LIFT at USAID. So, yeah, thank you everyone for participating and asking the questions that you asked. It's very helpful for us as we think about our next steps with these assessments.
All right. Thank you again so much, Claire, Mandy, and Sonia, for hosting this webinar. And again, guys, as I said, we will be following up with an email, and the two links, the first one is the link to the FSN Network webpage where this webinar event is housed, and then the liftproject.org after that. Again, thank you, and I guess that's it. Thanks, everyone.